Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Increased Plan and Spend Agility, brought to you by the CMO Council and KPMG. This actually was a webinar that we put on Thursday, May 28th, and unfortunately had a bit of technical difficulty, so we're re-recording it for the sake of everybody that wants to view this on demand. This is the final installment of a series of 4 webinars that we hosted this month to help marketers maximize returns from investments in areas like MarTech, content, agency partnerships, and campaigns. As marketers look to pivot their 2020 plans, we've been offering up 30, 60, and 90-day action plans to help get them started. I am today's moderator. My name is Sally Lopez. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing Program Management and Operations at the CMO Council. And I'm joined today by 3 best practice thought leaders from our partners over at KPMG, Jason Galloway, Jennifer Linardos, and Peter Friend. Jason is the Managing Director in KPMG's U.S. Customer Advisory Practice and serves as its Marketing Consulting Practice Lead. He has over 16 years of global experience in helping his clients transform their marketing organizations to meet the ever-changing needs of their customers. Jennifer is a Director in KPMG's U.S. Customer Advisory Marketing Consulting Practice and serves as the Consumer and Retail and Media Industry Lead. Jennifer is focused on customer strategy and growth with a concentration on customer-centric solutions and marketing effectiveness. And then finally, Pete is a partner in the strategy services arm of KPMG's advisory business and focuses on the technology, media, and telecommunications sector. He has 25 years of experience in the TMT space and specializes in helping clients employ advanced analytics to confidently develop strategies and identify tactics that fuel growth and operational improvements. In the previous 3 webinars, we focused on specific actions marketers can take to make the most of their current assets across their MarTech stack and content inventory, as well as best practices in optimizing the agency-brand relationship. This week, we want to drill down on how marketers can obtain the highest returns from their overall marketing campaign spend by reallocating dollars to the areas of greatest opportunity. We'll walk you through how to develop an early warning system for assessing what is and isn't working with the goal of helping you to better manage your spend across the portfolio. And we'll close out with a specific 30, 60, and 90-day action plan that accelerates those best possible outcomes. At the end of the presentation, we have saved time for a Q&A, and I saved the questions that came in when we originally recorded this, so I'll just be going through those again with our speakers. And I will be following up with everybody that attended to just make sure that you have this on-demand link and anybody that registered and wasn't able to attend, so that everybody can have a chance to benefit from the experience of learning from these 3 thought leaders over at KPMG. So I'm really excited to kick this off, and I'm going to pass over the baton to Jason to kick us off with the big picture.
Great, Sally, and thanks for having us again, and always great to talk to you, and excited to actually, I guess, have this culmination of this 4-part webinar series. And so thanks for the time. And what we're going to talk about today is increasing the return overall from your campaign spend. Before the pandemic, most knew what to invest in. They knew what the greatest opportunities for value creation were. That's not really the case today. It's really hard to understand where the opportunity exists. You look at market volatility, changes in consumer behavior, customer health. You need a much more dynamic approach. You need to be able to change directions quickly and allocate funds in a different way. And a lot of times, unfortunately, the level of financial rigor and agility that's needed, a lot of companies just don't have. So what we're going to do is really talk about how do you start building those capabilities. Unfortunately, the state of kind of the plan and spend it's quite anemic. If you look at where things are at, unfortunately, it's like one of the least favorite parts of the planning process. So you don't have a lot of people really lining up to say, ooh, let me do your financial analysis for you. There was some Duke research that came out recently that was talking about CMOs and where they prioritized financial acumen, and unfortunately, that was one of the things that was way down on the list. And so that kind of then leads to kind of a lack of skills and an appetite for that financial analysis, and it really starts to lead to weak plan and spend management overall. 50% of CMOs report that marketing activities are not aligned to business objectives. I always wonder if they're not aligned, then what are you spending the other 50% on? And so it's really important to get right. The next is those KPIs and metrics are missing. Only 33% of marketers said that they actually determine what the relevant KPIs are before even launching a campaign. I guess that's one way to get good results is make sure you do your KPIs after, but we all can do better than that. We all know that there's a better way. Next is planning and executing in silos. And a lot of times we talk about marketers and sales kind of being in silos, but you'll actually see some of that within brands and stuff as well. And the brand's not being coordinated, which then happens, then you get campaigns that are launching at the same time in the same channels. You start to swamp those channels and really drown out the message that you're trying to put out in the market. You have some people who are doing that set and forget funding. And so they set the budget well in advance and they don't have a chance, they don't review it and review the assumptions or the logic outlined months earlier and to see if they still apply. Before the pandemic, most knew how the customers were likely to behave. And that might have been okay, not perfect, but if you do that, it'll absolutely kill you today. Then you look at kind of that post-evaluation only. And if you do that and you don't evaluate it within a campaign and while things are going on, it really prevents the realigning of dollars when campaigns are underperforming and really inhibits kind of that learning from mistakes or successes. And finally, really almost probably more importantly, is there's really a lack of confidence in the results that marketing brings to the table. And marketing's really been under the gun to prove its value for quite a while. So how do we get out of this problem? What do we need to change? How do we start to do better? Gartner research shows that marketing budget processes in general for most companies are pretty immature. Most of them are just repeating prior year's activities and increasing the budget by only a fixed percent. But if you do that, then you're really just aligning against last year's activities and not really this year's business strategies. So you really need to make sure that you kind of have that critical thinking and the rigor to ensure that your spend aligns with strategy. More than I would say in the past 10 to 15 years, we have so much more data. And we need to bring that data-driven insights into the overall planning and budgeting processes. In the old days, we could use more business judgment about customers and markets, but that's just not true as much as it was in the past. So we need new data to make new sense of this kind of new environment. When I was talking about collaboration, a lot of people talk about sales and marketing, but I need to look at outside of that as well. I need to make sure, do I have products and services even available? I need to make sure I'm collaborating with supply chain and manufacturing. We need to continue to look at those as well, sales and channel partners, making sure that we're coordinated and we have cooperation on the marketing efforts and making sure that we're really all working together. In addition, we need to actually make sure that we're tracking and doing reporting in real time and that it's continuous and that we enhance it. So making sure that we have those leading KPIs so we can tweak the campaigns in flight or realign dollars. And lastly, but almost maybe even more importantly again, is just increasing the financial rigor of the planning and budgeting process overall. We need to make sure those KPIs are signed and scrutinized before funding is even approved. We need to make sure that those KPIs are clearly linked to financial returns, and then I can examine them at different levels of probability. And overall, make sure that that ROI is meeting the standards and making sure that I'm breaking even. In the original webinar, we conducted an audience poll to see where are you at now in general, and where do you stand in this, in your level of rigor. And one of the things that we found from the audience, which really wasn't as much of a surprise based on the other research, is the majority of audience, they didn't actually do it more than once a year. So they did either once a year, then maybe they did it quarterly. And if you do that today, if you don't constantly make changes and make updates, you're going to miss opportunities, but you're likely to get burned in the market as well. So with that, one of the things we paused here and took some questions from the audience. So Sally, why don't we go ahead with the question?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jason. So this question came in specifically around collaboration. So you mentioned collaboration as important to improve the campaign development process. Who should marketing actually be collaborating with?
I think that's a really good question. As I was talking about kind of the need to start to collaborate with, with supply chain and some of these other groups, see products there, but it really needs to be more than that. I need to look at sales and finance and distribution, logistics, customer service, e-commerce, internally, but also your external partners, your channel distribution partners, service solution providers, your agencies. I need to make sure I'm collaborating with all of those. But, it's interesting because then those question always comes up is like, wow, that's a lot of people. That seems like a lot of chaos. How do I manage that? And it's really important that you actually have the process set and defined before to really understand who should be brought in at what point. You're not going to bring in everybody for everything, but you need to make sure that you're touching point with them at certain points. So now that we kind of talked about that a little bit, why don't we actually start talking about building capabilities? And so I'm going to actually turn it over to Jen. Jen?
Thanks, Jason. One of the challenges we're hearing from our clients is improving alignment around marketing spend, and it can feel overwhelming to a lot of people. So this is why we say, start by focusing on the most important. The major point here is don't boil the ocean. There's not enough time, there's not enough resources to accomplish it all. And for a lot of companies, enhancing financial due diligence for the campaign planning process can seem like an immense and daunting task. But if you stay focused on what's important and the outcomes that you're going to achieve by doing this, it will help you reframe your mindset and approach and focus on getting it accomplished. First, focus your efforts on the brands, products, customers, geographies, and channels which you believe are the most critical for this year's performance. The campaigns for these entities are likely 20% of your go-to-market activities that will drive 80% of the impact for the fiscal year. Then, focus on improving campaign planning rigor into these programs. This is going to help you reduce the work effort to a more manageable size. Focus your attention on the most critical campaign funding decisions while impacting a significant portion of spend and maximizing the opportunity to align on the greatest spend to the greatest areas of opportunity. So let's talk about increased plan and spend agility and our 3 recommendations. Why these areas versus all the others that we could have selected? Well, we selected these because they're critical to making the best decisions possible in a short period of time, and it allows you to have the greatest impact. And more importantly, they won't impact your longer-term strategy and will actually put you in a better place for 2021. You should think of these as foundational activities that are going to be a part of your DNA. We'll lead off with partner spend alignment because in the best of markets, no one wants their spend to be at cross purposes with their partners. All your competitors are lined up to work against you, so you don't want to inadvertently let your partners, albeit internal or external, do the same. Additionally, in many industries, external partner spend can be very significant. Then, look at how to bring more insightful financial considerations and analysis into the campaign planning process. This will help ensure you fund the campaigns which are likely to have the best economic impact. It will also provide you with a means for evaluating campaign performance in flight, which will enable you to consider moving or reassigning funds to other campaigns. And lastly, establish an early warning system. To be able to ensure dollars are aligned to the greatest opportunity requires you track, reevaluate campaign impact, and model other options for those funds to consider how best to handle campaigns which are not meeting projected performance goals. Increasing partner spend alignment. Now more than ever, it's critical to partner and not work at cross purposes. Spending money without considering partner alignment is imprudent. Research shows that when marketing and sales strategies and spend are in alignment, average revenue growth is 3 to 5 times greater. And those organizations with strong sales and marketing alignment are 2.5 times as likely to have a joint planning and budgeting process in place. In today's marketing, sales and partner spend are likely reduced. Orchestrating efforts and aligning spend can pay off for everyone. So let's take a look at some actions you can take to better align marketing spend with partners. So here we're going to talk about some immediate quick wins in near-term solutions, things you can do now that won't impact your longer-term strategy. When we talk about quick wins, we're thinking about the next 30 to 60 to 90 days. And near term are things that you can look at in the next coming quarters. As a quick aside, we're focusing our quick wins suggestions on building alignment with internal sales organizations. However, marketers in manufacturing, retail industries, and others also need to be strengthening alignment with supply chain, production, and merchandising. Plus, marketers should be working closely with customer service. The very worst outcome from a marketing campaign is to generate demand which cannot be filled. You're better off losing money on a single campaign than frustrating your customers to the point that they're going to leave you forever. Quick wins. Integrated sales partner planning. Alignment and integration need to be an ongoing process, particularly these days when market volatility may require pivoting strategies, tactics, and spend. Working together regularly will increase your appreciation of each other's challenges and limitation in spend realignment. Sales typically doesn't have the same fixed spend issues as marketing. Together, you can align total internal go-to-market spend to get the biggest impact. Define and capture key metrics, ensure alignment. A shared process should be supported with shared metrics. These metrics need to be tracked, reported, and analyzed together. In our next recommendation, we're going to discuss activity, outcome, and impact KPIs. It's likely that sales and marketing will have their own activity and outcome measures tied to each campaign, but impact measures should be shared. Having clearly defined marketing, sales, and shared metrics around spend strategies facilitates fact-based decision-making. Align spend appropriately against the sales funnel. For sales and marketing to align, plans and spend both need to take a full funnel approach. No more focusing on the top or bottom of the sales funnel. Given today's circumstances likely dramatically have impacted your sales process and funnel, start by understanding what is happening with the sales cycle and customer behavior. Use this insight to understand where best to invest. Investing in moving existing prospects to convert may have more value than generating new leads for sales. Continually review the sales funnel to determine the impact of your efforts, to understand when the timing is right to shift some spend to other parts of the funnel, or when you need to change strategies, tactics, and associated spend altogether. Let's move on to near-term solutions. If your alignment with sales is strong, or you're able to make great headway in the next quarter, direct energy and efforts towards alignment with your partners. Traditionally, these are channel partners. Today, however, it might be also another company that is part of the solution that you provide. Either way, as we said, you want to work in concert with, not at cross purposes with your partners. Confirm partner strategies and adjust spending accordingly. At minimum, reach out to your partners to understand the state of their business and strategies for 2020. Share your goals with your partners. If you can, and we realize this isn't always possible, adjust the partner spend accordingly when the partner strategy and yours are very different. Minimize funding sales, promotional tactics, which don't support yours. When partners are open to your market strategies, work to get commitment from them to participate in your campaigns. And remember, focus is important. You may have hundreds of partners, but concentrate your efforts on the most important partners. Increase transparency of spend across the partner ecosystem. This has often been a challenge for many firms, as partners have not wanted to share specifics on how funds were spent or the results generated. Today, however, partner firms realize development, promotion, and co-op funding will be far more limited than in prior years. This may make them more open to accepting funds which come with restrictions and obligations. If they're not more willing to coordinate those activities, then spend the funding elsewhere. If you're contractually obligated to give the partner funding, then the best you can do is either align your spend with the partner's plan or ensure that you're not in the same market at the same time to avoid working at cross purposes. And lastly, assess spend results individually and collectively. If you're able to align spend and marketing programs with partners, be sure to consider the results of that spend for both your firm and the partners. The goal for both companies is to see a good return on investment. Given attribution of sales to different marketing tactics can be challenging, so look at return at both the individual level and the collective level. Consider what is most important and think about what's a good investment for both parties. It's nice to know how each company performed and what tactics work best. However, given this year is a reset year, it's unclear how much of what is learned this year will have broader implications for next year. So just stay focused on the big picture. With that, I'll pass it to Pete, who will talk a bit more about applying financial rigor into campaigns. Pete?
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, so I'm Pete Friend, and I'm going to spend a few minutes discussing how you can begin to improve the financial rigor that sits behind your campaign planning and management efforts, and hopefully begins to give marketing, higher and higher levels of credibility with your finance partners in the organization. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that maybe more than ever, leadership's eyes are on every nickel being spent across the company, and marketing is certainly no exception. At the same time, in this new world, and Jason alluded to this, in this new world, new reality in which we find ourselves, any preconceived notions you had, assumptions you had, or even analytics you had around how the market reacts to different campaigns, different stimuli that you're putting in the marketplace will, at a minimum, be challenged going forward. So you really need to be more diligent than ever around watching what's happening, learning from what's happening, planning, being financially responsible around what you're doing. One point I'd love to mention here is that in a recent CEO CFO survey, it was found that 80% of the respondents did not believe their marketing teams had a really solid understanding of the connection between the work that they were doing and company financials. So again, the bar is raised, and the questions are there from the CEO, CFO community around, do we really know what we're doing and how it connects to the way the company performs? So needless to say, stakes are high, and with less budget as well as many other current realities in the marketplace, every campaign funding decision becomes even more critical. So, and I just realized that there we go. So as I move into the next slide, I thought it would be worth sharing a real life example that I saw where this process broke down. I had an opportunity to sit in a meeting with a consumer products company, set of marketing, their marketing team and their agency, and this marketing team talked about how they were about $100 million business, were growing at about 3% a year historically, and they really wanted to dial it up this year and get the performance levels to a 10% growth year. And as you can imagine, everyone was excited to inject growth into the business. And if you think about those numbers for a minute, I'm a $100 million business. I want to add an additional 7 percentage points of growth. I want to get $7 million more revenue to drop to the business. Well, the marketing or the agency team came back and said, guys, if you can give me, instead of the $3 million that we typically spend to help support this business, give me $13 million this coming year, we think we can help you drive that level of growth. And again, everyone's very excited about what the campaigns will look like and how they're going to do that. And I raised my hand and I asked the team if they could help me with the math, because very simple math suggests that we're spending $10 million more to drive $7 million in revenue, much less profit. And I didn't mean to be the guy who brought the room down, but I did believe it was a responsible thing to do to start to ask those questions. And I think the team reevaluated the way to go about that. And what I really want to make sure that we're helping you do is think about how you can be financially rigorous and responsible as you start to think about your campaigns. So looking at the slide that you have here, on the left-hand side, the approach that we're advocating is really just additive to the more strategic campaign planning activities you're probably already executing against, like the strategic brief and the media and creative strategy efforts that you're putting in place. All of these things play a very large role in driving campaign and performance and costs. If I move to the middle part of the slide where it says develop assumption-driven financial models, it's really critical, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time here, it's really critical that you're developing a financial model that's connected to a ladder of key KPIs and performance assumptions. The ladder is made up of activity KPIs, outcome KPIs, financial impact KPIs. Activity KPIs, starting at the top, they largely look to capture what we expect the exposure of our campaign to be in the marketplace. And we often have a lot of control over these types of metrics. For example, if you look at email, that might include the number of emails delivered. If you look at a display ad or a digital ad, that might be number of impressions. So again, we have a lot of control over the activity type KPIs, but they should be the kind of the foundation of your financial model. Then you start to think about what we call outcome KPIs. And these metrics are largely looking to capture the expected market response to your campaigns. So an example of that would be, the number of emails opened, or for display ads, a click-through rate. We really encourage you to select outcome metrics that are trackable, that you can really watch over the course of the campaign and on an almost real-time basis, so you can start to evaluate how you're doing versus your plan. And you can start to think about how you're going to be able to achieve your overall campaign goals and financial results. At the bottom, the set of KPIs that you're going to see are the financial impact measures. These are where you really clearly link the campaign's activities outcomes to expected revenue, costs, margin, and ultimately campaign return on investment. This is what gets you ultimately toward the business case of the campaign, and quite frankly, where a lot of your finance team members will be looking for you to be justifying what you're doing. Important note here is, as you think about this ladder, the top two, activity KPIs, where you have a lot of control, and your outcome KPIs, where it really is how the market is reacting real time to what they're seeing. These can be your called leading indicators around how the campaign is going. And if your leading indicators start to look off relative to what you were planning or hoping, you can really quickly look at how you can pivot, or in some cases even decide the numbers are so in such a poor place, it may even make sense to pull back on the campaign before you just throw more money at something that is clearly not doing what you want to. So that's kind of the middle column, which is the really critical centerpiece of your financial rigor that you're employing here. On the right-hand side, and it really goes with the middle column, is as you're putting together that financial model and set of assumptions, you really need to pressure test what you're putting in place, because a lot of times people will make assumptions around how the market will react, or what's going to be driven from the campaign. And if those numbers deviate from what the baseline expectation was or plan was, you can very quickly start to see yourself moving into a break-even territory, or a territory that goes below an ROI threshold that you're looking to hit. So again, doing that pressure testing, trying to put in place what is the lowest thing I could think could happen coming out of the campaign across some of the different KPIs and levers, and what are some optimistic considerations for what those numbers could be, and really run that financial through a set of scenarios, and get a good pressure test in place. So with that, again, this is a very important piece that we'll hope you take away. And we're going to move to the next slide here and talk about some of the quick wins, and some of the quick wins and near-term solutions that we believe will be helpful. First off, marketing leadership should clearly define a process and templates to be used in a campaign's financial modeling process and exercise. That template process should include what are activity KPIs, what are outcome KPIs, and financial impact KPIs, so that everyone has a very clear view of how they should be considering the financial modeling process. Secondly, establish assumption guidelines and KPI ladders. Really important to not just say, hey, you've got to think about what KPIs to put in place, but what are some guidelines, some guardrails around what some assumptions that are reasonable versus not reasonable can be, as far as those assumptions are concerned. And even put in place some benchmarks around historically what have we seen around certain KPIs or benchmarks, and with the knowledge that some of those benchmarks may not hold as we live in this new world, but again, they're really good ideas to have those in play as you think about doing your financial modeling. And then organization-wide use for trade-off analysis. So really implementing this across the entire organization is pretty important for a couple different reasons. One, if everyone is using the same types of thinking and templates and benchmarks, you can do a very solid job of trade-off analysis between, which campaign should receive more or less budget. So you can think more organization-wide. And secondly, from an organization point of view, when everyone is doing it, it starts to really drive the organization to embed that in the way you think and the way the organization thinks over not just the short term, but over the longer term. So really an organization-wide rollout is usually super helpful. Near-term solutions, focusing a little bit more on the technology side. A lot of times companies already have financial or have platforms in place that can facilitate at least some level of financial planning. And you may need to enhance what's there, but it's always great to start out by using some form of a tool and something that you already have as a starting point. And secondly, getting back to the assumptions and guidelines, there's often ways to embed with automation some ideas around, boy, if people put assumptions in place that really go out of bounds or beyond what might be considered reasonable. So it can really help people keep their financial modeling exercises in a place that makes most sense and that can be trusted. So again, some quick wins, near-term solutions that can hopefully get you started on this type of an exercise sooner or later. And maybe I'll ask Sally, do we want to cover any of the questions that came in from last week?
Yeah, I would love to cover one, Pete, because we're talking a lot about KPIs. And this question is, why are activity or outcome KPIs needed when I can just evaluate the financial performance of a given campaign? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there are a couple things with that, I think, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the idea of activity and outcome KPIs, those are the things that you're going to get the earliest read on when the campaign is in market. So you'll start to see, how your exposures are hitting the marketplace, how your reactions are hitting the marketplace, and those can really act as your leading indicators for how do I think overall in the end this campaign will contribute to the financial success of the company. And if those KPIs are not looking good, you can really help avoid spending money that is going to not give you the return that you want. So it's a early indicator way to help you manage your business. That's number one. And number two, and I really think this is super important given conversations that I'm having with not only marketers, but the CFO side of the house, is that those linkages that are clearly connecting the advertiser, marketer side of the world to the financial side of the world are going to continue to give marketers more and more credibility with the finance side of the house, and that is something that is absolutely going to be more and more critical today and going forward than it ever has before. So I think all of those connections are super, super important.
Yeah, that's so helpful, Pete. So that's great. I'm now going to bring Jason back into the conversation to help us understand how folks can really set up an early warning system and then go through our 30, 60, 90-day action plan that we've laid out for marketers.
Great. Thanks, Sally. Thanks, Pete. So we're going to talk now about how do you start to develop an early warning system. So if you have more rigor in your plans, but ultimately, are they tracking to perform? So we're going to kind of talk about the tools to understand what's happening. How do you do further analysis or changes needed? More importantly, how do you do it quickly? So the goal is to understand what's working and what's not as quickly as possible so you can move the dollars elsewhere if needed. You don't have maybe the 2 weeks that you used to have in the past. So as we talk through this, we're going to kind of work our way from left to right. But overall, as you look to establish an early warning system, there's three major parts. So we're going to identify the assumptions, we're going to talk through performance reporting, and then really look at that real-time analysis. So the first thing we're going to look at is identify assumptions. And there's two different types of assumptions that you use here, both the opportunity assumptions as well as the campaign assumptions. Those opportunity assumptions are about consumers and businesses and how they're behaving. They're really shaped by how healthy the industry may be, or how specific customers are behaving. So consumer, you might look at things like unemployment, spending, sentiment. On business, you might look at manufacturing or inventory, and those sorts of things. In the past, these things that were much more stable, right, over time, they wouldn't change dramatically maybe from month to month, but now they could change dramatically in a very short time. Look at the unemployment rate and how much it's changed just in the last 60 days, for instance. The next are the campaign assumptions, and these are really going to be determined when doing your planning and your financial analysis process up front. And these are going to become your input into your early warning system. These campaign assumptions, you're not creating new here. It's really bringing in all the stuff that Pete just talked about and what he explained. Views, clicks, behaviors, those sort of assumptions. The ultimate goal here is really to determine where you think an opportunity is and find a way to exploit that opportunity as much as possible. So if a campaign isn't working, did you misunderstand the opportunity? Or maybe you didn't even build a campaign to exploit that opportunity in the right way. Is it the campaign? Is it the opportunity? Is it both? You might have thought, for instance, that consumer confidence was going to be high, but constricting is much more, spending is much more constricted than what you thought it was going to be. So is the campaign creating a shortfall, or maybe even actually even creating an opportunity in a different way? You can't unfortunately make people feel more confident with the economy. So ultimately, if the reason is more about the opportunity assumptions, no matter what you do, you may not drive the desired response. In the world before, people had a really good sense of what those opportunity assumptions were. It was more stable, it was the same. So if a campaign didn't exploit it, it was often the failure of the campaign. But you can't really make that assumption anymore. So the next is the performance reporting. Looking at how is it doing? Are things going well? Are they not going well? You're going to look at the activity, the outcome, the financials, but to do that, you have to look at the total cost. At the end of the day, this is about ROI. It's about the dollar impact. So you need to have the cost handy to be able to do that analysis and look at all of the metrics. You need to understand what the financial impact is to determine what ultimately you do to a campaign. So now we're going to talk through that real-time analysis and looking at both the campaign analysis and the trade-off analysis. And the most important thing is you want to be able to do this quickly. You want to understand what's going on, why is it going on, so you can go back and make changes to the assumptions. Ultimately, you want to bring the financial model back into alignment with what you actually can achieve. So you can make determinations. Do I want to kill something? Do I want to put money elsewhere? Do I want to put more money into it? How do I want to adjust it? So it's important to understand, where do I put the money? What is that trade-off analysis? Do I do one campaign or a different one? This is really about determining a framework to see where should the money go to get that best bottom line impact. Remember, it's important too that this is a closed loop. So whatever you identify, you should be able to adjust your assumptions going forward. This is really about creating a learning model so that you can continuously test and learn and make changes on the fly. So what are those quick wins and those near-term solutions that you want to use when developing this early warning system? So the first is really that process. So you want to start with, well, what should the process look like? I want to look at the validity of what those assumptions are. If there's no dashboard, no trade-off analysis, for instance, that you have now, first just make sure that you've assumed the right KPIs. At least, you'll get some better insights, and you can kind of do a sanity check, because you really need a way to double check what those assumptions are. It's actually really important too that if you look at, when you're double checking those assumptions, if you're using some real research data, make sure you're going out there to publicly available data sources. And even in today's world, you might have been using that previously, but make sure that that data is refreshed. As quickly as things are changing, you can't just set up some opportunity assumptions with data that's a year old, or that's a quarter old, or whatever. So you need to make sure that you're using constantly refreshed data. The next is calculating the financial impact from invalid assumptions. What are those? Understanding what those true KPIs to understand what the impact is. So for instance, you thought it was going to be 30%, but it's 37%. Well, what does that mean? What's the bottom line impact? So lastly on quick wins is identify the options, understand what those trade-offs are, understand, do I need to kill a campaign? If so, where do I put the money? You better be sure, if you're going to kill the campaign, that you're going to put it in at least something that's better performing, because if not, you should keep going with it. Even if it's not exactly what you expected, because some revenue is frankly still better than no revenue at all. Next, on the near-term solutions, you need to start to build simple online tools. How do you start to take stuff off of people's desktops and spreadsheets and start to move them online so that you can have much more comprehensive sharing and trade-off analysis between departments, between brands, geos, categories, however you're set up and organized, so ultimately you can make better decisions as a group. You can make better trade-off analysis. And lastly, it's about creating these predictive models. If you already have some, approach your data scientist, understand what are the probability models, what are the trade-off models. I always like to say, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. At least get started, and you'll at least make better decisions than you're making today. The other thing that's important is be sure that those existing models that you might have been using are still performing at the current levels. You look at what happened in 2008, and a lot of the models that people were using right afterwards, they just were no longer valid. So you need to make sure that you're going back and you're double checking that the campaign assumptions you were making previously are right, and that old models have, they might not have the same predictive strength that they used to. So make sure you're going back and double checking all of that stuff. So next, one of the things that we told people is we promised an action plan, that's 30, 60, 90 days, what do I do? And so if you look at these as kind of journeys and look at it kind of by rows, we're going to start with the first one, which is really all about business-to-business companies that are maybe early in the campaign planning capabilities. And this is about lining marketing and Salesforce spend. So you first want to understand the current state of the sales process. The process changed. How many touches? How long is the process? What's the close rate? I'm pretty sure most B2B companies, especially, their processes changed a lot, especially the number of touch points and how long the process is, than it was even 90 days ago. Next, I want to do an ongoing go-to-market planning process with the sales organization. I want to identify and align on the KPIs. I want to determine the strategy and tactics for the remainder of the year. And I want to make sure that the sales to the spend is aligned with that sales strategy and tactics as well. Once those process KPIs are established, I want to start to stand up the reports and the dashboards to manage the spend. I want to understand the results, not just individually from sales and marketing, but I also want to understand them combined. So then if you look at the middle journey, this is really for those B2B and B2C companies that need to build more financial rigor to the overall planning process. So I want to start with building the tools and templates and that create consistency between the different groups and the different organizations. That's really important so that you can, later when you're doing the financial analysis, you can make sure you're comparing apples to apples. Next, I want to establish the guidelines and those assumption ranges and those KPI ladders to make sure that I have realistic ranges. We want to understand how are those impacted by customer segments or by different campaigns or creatives and offers. Most importantly, I want to be able to explain those assumptions. Lastly, I want to start to implement the new processes. I want the templates, the KPI ladders across all of marketing. It's going to be really important when you do that you train your people, that you make sure that people are using a similar approach to the campaign financial analysis. If not, you're not going to be able to make those trade-off decisions between customer segments, geos, brands, products. So that's going to be really important. Lastly, if you look at journey number 3, the first thing this is all about establishing that last row there. It's about establishing that early warning system. So you're going to start by gathering that key data, and some of it's going to be manual and some of it's going to be a workaround. But once again, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Don't wait until you have absolutely everything stood up before you start to implement this early warning system. You probably already have a strong set of KPIs. Make sure you're identifying and monitoring those so that if your assumptions are wrong, you can make changes because your campaign won't be as negatively impacted. Next, we want to start building those simple tools that we talked about. Start building those and putting those online so I can capture the key KPIs. I can start making trade-off analysis. And finally, I want to start working with my data scientists to build much more advanced models to really start to make some changes. So with that, Sally, why don't we go ahead and go to the Q&A section?
All right, wonderful. Yeah, those 30, 60, 90-day action plans are so key, especially today when I know everybody's kind of trying to scramble and pivot. So thank you for walking us through that, Jason. I wanted to kind of go back earlier in the conversation when Jen was talking about, how important those key partnerships are and those channel partners. But a question had come in that said, oftentimes that marketers and this marketer in particular finds that their channel partners have been a little bit resistant, especially as it relates to sharing campaign information, but really to working collaboratively overall. Jen, what would you suggest that they do to improve that collaboration and that overall partnership?
Yeah, that's a really common issue that a lot of folks have. And in a lot of industries, this is a real challenge. But if we look at today's economic climate and what's going on right now in the marketplace, this is a really good opportunity to really start communicating with those partners, even those that you feel like they're not going to be open to that. Because in this new climate that we're sort of all operating in right now, people understand and businesses understand that we really have to work together to grow and pool our resources, and that will lead to the greater good for everybody. The other thing that you can also think about is take a look at your contracts. And if you have the flexibility, consider allocating your partner funds to those partners who are willing to work with you. And if they're not going to be willing to work with you, the other thing really is to try to tweak your plans. And when we talk about plans, we don't mean change your strategy, but change the timing, the offers, the targets, so that you're not working at cross purposes with your partners, which we mentioned before. And if that's not possible, just stay out of that market. You just want to stay away from that. And when it does work, again, this is a great opportunity to go back to those partners and showcase for them, this is the successes that we had in doing this. And hopefully we can start to collaborate and be more open and transparent with each other in the future. So again, I think the key right now is just be communicative with those partners and really try to work with them the best you can.
Fantastic. And just in a related question, Jen, if the agency is really managing that campaign process and taking that key role over with the campaign process, do marketers still need the financial analysis and early warning systems?
That's a really good question. It's really important regardless of who you're working with. This is something for you to be able to monitor and to help you with your decision-making process. Also, your partner's business models are going to be different than yours, so it's really essential to create financial analysis and early warning systems to ensure you meet your business objectives. So again, it's great to be able to collaborate and work with folks, but you also have to be responsible and make sure that you're working on time and on target and being able to pivot on your strategies and your campaigns.
Great, fantastic. So Pete, I'm going to go to you. What are some of the best practices that you would outline in evaluating campaign performance?
Boy, going back, so evaluating, there's a couple different things. One is getting a plan in place ahead of time so that you actually have something to go back and review your performance against. So you should always, and we've talked about it a number of times throughout this, always have a very clear plan in place around your expectations so that you can go back and compare, not at the end, but real time in market, how you're doing against those expected campaign results. So that's number one, and that can be fairly, if you are diligent, it can be a fairly straightforward process to actually do that. Again, making sure all the KPIs you're coming up with can be tracked, they're trackable, they're measurable, and you can continuously go through that. Now, that's the in-campaign components. There's another set of things that I would make sure that everyone ultimately is thinking about as well, which is how do you make sure that in every campaign that you're going through, you're not just evaluating how that campaign did, but you're learning from what worked well in that campaign, what didn't work well in that campaign, so that you can take those learnings and take them to your future campaigns. And that is a set of different processes that you would employ, whether people have heard about attribution analytics or marketing mix modeling, or those things are evolving over time. But that's a whole set of different measurement capabilities and test and learn that I would really advocate that in addition to being really rigorous in your planning and your in-market management, that you're constantly learning from everything that you put in place, that you're getting better and better over time. And last thing I'll say with that is more important than ever than that marketers are rethinking through how they're putting measuring sticks in place, because all of the measures that you've had that historically suggested you do certain things, those things may or may not be in play anymore, just given the way the world is changing today. So, but a number of different things, and Sally, I can't emphasize enough as to how important all of those measurement of campaign performance and what worked, what didn't, can help marketers get better and better over time. So,
yeah. And you touched on it, that right now we're in a particularly difficult moment. And this question came in that, this individual said that their marketing budget has been cut significantly. And I'm sure there are many marketers that are listening to this right now that can identify with that, right? That seems to be the case across the board. So with that as a backdrop and having that marketing budget really slashed and marketers are working with very little, how important is it that they still set up these campaign financial plans and these early warning systems?
Yeah, I'd say it's more important than ever, and that they really think through every campaign, every media channel has a different point at which it starts to really move the needle. So for example, with digital, every dollar you put in tends to return something. But if you're doing things like radio, TV, there are certain levels that you need to hit before you start to hit breakthrough. So more than ever, when your budgets are more limited, you need to think through where every dollar you're spending is going, and making sure that every dollar is getting you to a return. So yeah, it's more than ever today. That's important. And everything you do, you can learn, so that when maybe some of those budgets free up a little bit more, you'll be smarter about where you spend the dollars going forward as well.
Right. More important than ever to really have their eye on everything that's going on, to your point, so they can make sure that the limited budget is actually effective. So I think that's so key.
Yep.
Jason, I wanted to go back, because you talked in detail about this early warning system, and certainly Pete just touched on that as well, right? That it's so important to have this in place. But it can get a bit complicated. So this person's asking, is this really a best practice? And how can they get a system set up before year end, assuming that they don't have anything like this in place right now?
Yeah, I know it's one of those things is when you look at it or you hear it kind of explained the first time, it can sound somewhat complicated, because you might think you have to have all these different tools and analysis and all these people involved, but really it doesn't have to be that complicated, especially to get started. It can be done in Excel. It can be done on a SharePoint application. You don't necessarily have to have specialized tools. It's going to be important to make sure that you have the right data and the right assumptions, but if you do the stuff Pete was talking about earlier, you'll have a lot of that stuff already. And as I was going to say, again, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. How do you actually just start by focusing on your key strategic campaigns, like the old 80-20 rule? Start to get some certain things in the system, and then focus on the guidelines for some of those key assumptions, and be able to start to monitor in-market performance. Continue to add stuff to it as you roll along. A lot of this data, as we were talking about through some opportunity assumptions, some of this data is even publicly available. How do you start to gather that and just put it in one place? Is it possible to have up by the end of the year? Absolutely it is. It's because, once again, you don't have to make it overly complicated and complex. Just continue to refine it and think about it a little bit more as a journey, if you will. Is it best practice? I would say absolutely. In today's world, you need to know what's going on and be able to make adjustments. They're really essential to evaluate the overall campaign performance. Because if you don't make the modifications as things going on, you're not going to get the returns that you want. And as I talked about all the way at the very beginning, the pressures on marketing organizations more than ever to prove return on investment, to prove the value. Marketers always lament that they're the first ones to get their budget cut. You know, if you're able to prove the value, then your budget probably won't be cut as quickly as maybe somebody else's. So I find it extremely important. So hopefully that answers your question, Sally.
Yeah, and that is such a huge point, Jason. It comes up time and time again of really how do we measure the success of what we're doing to prove our values. So I think that this is so key in order to be able to do that. Jason, I have time for one more question, and so I wanted to pass this one to you as well because it still touches on this idea of the early warning system. So it says, I'm not certain our marketing staff has either the time or the skills necessary to create this system. Who can we get within our organization to help, and how do I position this work as critical and worth their time?
Yeah, you know, I was talking earlier about just the need for financial acumen in the marketing organization. So a lot of people end up facing this because they don't end up having the people in the organization to be able to do that. The first thing I would say is recruit assistance from your marketing finance or corporate finance teams. You know, if you have a data science team, they might be able to actually help you create some of this trade-off analysis and scenario models that you can actually use in your analysis. So there are the parts in your organization to help. You know, and ultimately, if you emphasize how this will make, frankly, marketing better, they'll be able to start to measure ROI, returns. I'm sure there's not a single CFO out there or head of marketing finance who wouldn't be willing to help and support their journey there. So thank you for those questions. As you know, we look to wrap up this 4-part webinar series. We thank you for the opportunity to be here and talk with you about this. Our really goal has been to help marketers make smarter financial investment decisions and hopefully accelerate some value generation in 2020. If you think about our key recommendations here, think about it a little bit like kind of an equation, if you will. So the first was really about maximizing your existing assets, whether it's from MarTech or content, and frankly, 2 areas that you typically have some limited returns. If you add that to paying less for new, how do I spend less and make that money go further, especially in 2 key areas such as content development and media purchasing. And we talked about considering agency management, looking at rates and dropping costs for the overall development. If you do those 2 things, you'll have more money for in-market activities. So if you do that, you kind of multiply it by aligning it to the areas with the greatest opportunity and really maximizing that ROI. You'll be so much further than you are today. So it's our pleasure, KPMG, to present with the CMO Marketing Council this 4-part webinar series. If you have any questions or comments, or you'd like to see how can you drive more financial insights into your marketing decisions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you to all of our speakers today, Jason Galloway, Jennifer Leonardos, and Pete Friend. As Jason said, reach out to him, reach out to any of these 3. We've got their contact info on the webinar event page. And unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today, but I'm really excited that we were able to get through this presentation and get back through some of these fantastic questions that came in from the audience. So I want to thank everybody that took the time to join us, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.